Throughout my time at university, I have never created a piece of work to do with myself or my own feelings, and so I decided to try it this past academic year, and in turn it has allowed me to express my feelings about my life and my experiences surrounding my family. And so for my final photography project at university, I decided to create a piece of work that was much more personal than any of my previous work. When I began creating A Feeling of Guilt, I did not intend for it to become my final piece of photography. I was simply enjoying a night of looking at my parents' childhood photographs with them. When it came to looking at my father's photographs in comparison to my mother's, I realised that I felt a disconnect from his family, specifically from my grandmother. Within my family, we are considerably closer with my mother's side, and while I am close with my grandfather on my father's side, I have never known my father's mother. She never expressed any interest in meeting, speaking to, or generally knowing me or my sister. This used to hurt me when I was younger, as I felt as though I wasn't good enough for her. She had met her other grandchildren, so why not us? However, through growing up and learning more about my father's relationship with her, I felt less hurt and I understood more. My father has never expressed any strong feelings towards his mother. There is no hatred or grudge. He loves her, but they simply do not keep in contact. This was always baffling to me due to my closeness with my parents. I simply cannot imagine not speaking with them. However, this was just the way it was for my father until she passed away a few years back. This feeling of disconnect was what drove my inspiration to create this piece of work, and so I channeled these emotions and began experimenting. A story that I have been telling to help explain my thought process in how I should distort my images is when I was very young and my sister had just come back from a school trip and had gotten her disposable camera developed. She was very excited to show us her photos, and I believed that I was being extremely helpful and would clean one of the photos that looked dirty by using hand sanitizer. However, much to my surprise, this took up all of the ink, leaving her photograph completely blank. She was not impressed. Remembering this, I started by photocopying my father's photographs onto photo paper at home. Then I began testing out my techniques for minor destruction. Burning, bleach, slicing, and even cooking the paper were my starting points. However, I finally found the technique that I wanted to pursue: scratching off the ink with a flathead screwdriver. With this, I began the creative process of removing my family members from their own photographs. I wanted to create a piece of work that was in a state of juxtaposition, something that had a homely feeling but also brought about a slight discomfort, and scratching out individuals was the perfect method. When I was experimenting, I found that this technique left a stain of the ink after being scratched off. This gave the impression of an unfamiliar lingering presence amongst the normal unfamiliar. This expressed how I felt about some of the family members. A huge inspiration to this work was the emergence of a subgenre of horror within the online world, often referred to as liminal horror. Liminal horror is characterized by the feeling of the uncanny or unheimlich, a phrase coined by Sigmund Freud, meaning unhomely. Freud describes an uncanny effect as often and easily produced by effacing the distinction between imagination and reality. This phrase today is often used to describe something that feels familiar but shouldn't. Examples of this include images of so-called liminal spaces, which give many people this sense of having been to these places, often during childhood, giving us that hazy feeling of something being ever so slightly nostalgic. However, in reality, many of these places either do not actually exist or the individual cannot possibly have visited them. A key project that inspired me within my photography was the work of the creator known as Kane Pixels online. This artist created a video titled The Backrooms Found Footage, depicting the first-person point of view of an individual falling into what has become known as the backrooms. The backrooms are a fictional space within the cracks of reality. They are an endless maze of dingy yellow hallways and disturbed with its possibility to contain something unknown and dangerous. This unknown yet threatening presence was what inspired me to replicate aspects of the uncanny into my own work, and the ghostly presence that was left behind with the ink did this perfectly. I did not wish to recreate this piece of work that was distinctly within the horror umbrella, but rather I wanted to pull snippets of the uncomfortable feeling that emanates from this genre. When it finally came to displaying my work, I first had my heart set on having everything exhibited on a small scale. During the interim critique, I hung my work in old frames that I bought from charity shops. They were all roughly the size of an A4 piece of paper, and I positioned them to have the most scattered and unplanned look possible in order to create an atmosphere that you would find in a home. This was something that I really loved and was really proud of how I had displayed. However, through more creation and experimentation, I realised that I was selling myself short by keeping the work so small, and that I was simply reluctant to take up too much space in fear of upsetting anyone positioned around me. After realising this, however, I pushed myself to take a leap and print on a scale more comparable to A0 for my final exhibition. This was a fantastic decision, as it allowed for the scratch marks to have a much greater level of detail displayed, and made my work stand out so much more. Furthermore, I made an addition to my work after speaking with my father about how he felt seeing his childhood photographs in this way. After we talked and he reminisced on some fond memories, I asked him if he would write a page about how each of these images made him feel. One aspect of these pieces of writing that adds so much to the personal aspect that I wanted to convey is the fact that it is my father's handwriting. I have always loved his handwriting because he writes in all capitals due to his poor eyesight, and he struggles to read anything but large lettering. Furthermore, my father used to be a graffiti artist, and so I have always admired how stylistic his natural handwriting is. When writing these, he also took it upon himself to add titles to each image, something I had not even considered to do. These aspects really intensified this homely and familiar feeling to me, as they hold so much of his personality and life experiences within them. Originally, these pieces of writing were intended to be displayed on the wall alongside the photographs. However, upon execution, myself and my friends who were assisting me quickly realised that they were not going to fit at all, and so quick and somewhat panicked thinking led me to turning a sketchbook into a memory album, which was then displayed next to the images. Further panicking ensued when I ruined 3 sketchbook covers attempting to write the title on them using white paint pens. However, this miraculously led to my father coming to help and resulting him in titling the book in his graffiti handwriting, leaving the memory album very reminiscent of his countless graffiti sketchbooks, in which he has many pieces of artwork consisting of my mother's name with hearts around it, and pages with her drawings that he admires. Ultimately, this past year of work within my final stage of university has allowed me to break free from my old ways of keeping myself small and out of the way for the sake of others, and has led me to feel confident in creating work that expresses the ways that I feel about the aspects of my life. I feel as though my photography in this final exhibition perfectly illustrates how I perceive this missing chunk of my family, and hopefully I can give the audience a glimpse into how myself and my father feel about this aspect of both of our lives.